Disclaimer. In this video, we will cover tragic and disturbing events that have taken place in history. May the victims be remembered, and may their souls rest in peace. Oklahoma City bombing, United States. It was a seemingly normal Wednesday morning in Oklahoma City, a place famous for tornadoes and barbecue, but definitely not for terror. People were probably just busy complaining about their commute and drinking coffee. Then, without warning, at 9:02 a.m., the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was rocked by a massive explosion that was felt 16 miles away. This wasn't just a loud bang, it was like someone had tried to nuke a skyscraper. Apparently, a rental truck loaded with 5,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate fertilizer mixed with fuel oil was the cause of this explosion. It was the work of two men, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, both U.S. citizens. Well, McVeigh, the ringleader, had a serious grudge against the U.S. government, like the ultimate case of I hate my boss, except his boss was, the entire government. He was particularly angry over how the government handled the Waco siege in 1993, where a bunch of people died in a standoff between a religious group and federal agents, and the Ruby Ridge incident, another standoff gone wrong. McVeigh thought the government was getting too big for its britches, and instead of writing a strongly worded letter, he decided to make a statement with an explosive that would forever etch his name in the history books. Well, when McVeigh detonated the bomb, the blast tore through the building like it was made of tissue paper, instantly collapsing part of the 9-story structure. The explosion was so powerful that it destroyed or damaged 324 buildings in a 16-block radius and smashed 86 cars. It was like someone had taken a sledgehammer to the city. But even worse, among the rubble was the building's daycare center, where children were among the most vulnerable victims. Thankfully, Timothy was caught 90 minutes after the bombing on a traffic violation. Eventually, he was convicted of the bombing and sentenced to death. He was executed in 2001, making him the first federal prisoner to be put to death in 38 years. His accomplice, Terry Nichols, got life in prison. Madrid train bombing, Spain. It's March 11th, 2004, a crisp Thursday morning, and Madrid's commuter trains are packed with people. Now, at this point, Spain is knee-deep in election season, and the political tension is so thick you could probably cut through it with a knife. However, out of nowhere, at around 7:37 a.m., 10 coordinated blasts tear through 4 crowded trains along 3 stations. These explosions were so bad that it was basically like someone had decided to replace rush hour with rush terror. At first, there was a lot of confusion with everybody asking the same question: who could have done this? The immediate suspect was the Basque separatist group ETA, a group known for its violent campaign for independence. The government even pointed fingers at them initially, like when you assume your sibling ate your leftover pizza. But it turned out the real culprits were Islamist militants, likely linked to Al-Qaeda. Apparently, this was a revenge act tied to Spain's involvement in the Iraq War, which didn't sit well with these militants. The attackers had planned the whole thing with chilling precision. They loaded backpacks with explosives and left them on the trains, all set to go off at the worst possible time, just as people were packed in like sardines. The worst part is, they didn't even stick around to see the results. They left those bombs on timers and got away before the horror unfolded. A total of 193 people lost their lives, and 2,000 plus were critically injured. Mumbai attacks, India. The city of Mumbai, formerly Bombay, is known for its vibrant street life, Bollywood glam, and of course, some of the best food on the planet. But on November 26, 2008, all that changed as the city faced an assault unlike anything it had ever seen. The day started like any normal day. People were winding down after a day of work, tourists were enjoying Mumbai's famous waterfront, and restaurant chatter was just as lively as always. But suddenly, the city was hit with a coordinated terror attack that lasted 3 full days. Imagine that. 72 hours of absolute madness, fear, and tragedy. Here's the play-by-play. 10 terrorists from a Pakistan-based military group called Lockerbie came ashore in Mumbai after traveling by boat with only one mission in mind: cause as much devastation as possible. So, armed to the teeth with AK-47s, grenades, and explosives, they fanned out across the city like chaos-loving tourists on a murderous rampage. The worst part is that this wasn't even a random attack, but it had been meticulously planned for months. Lashkar-e-Taiba, the group behind the attack, was furious about India's control over Kashmir and thought to make a global statement about their jihadist cause. But instead of issuing a press release Israelis, like most normal organizations do when they want attention, they decided to send a violent message using bullets and bombs. Their training was so intense that some of these attackers reportedly took instructions via satellite phone during the chaos. Talk about commitment to the worst kind of team-building exercise. The attackers didn't just shoot indiscriminately. They took hostages, planted bombs, and spread fear with every step. It was the kind of fear that turned the city that never sleeps into a city too terrified to blink. Well, the death toll of this attack was staggering. A total of 166 people were killed, including 18 security personnel and 26 foreigners, and over 300 people were injured. Eventually, the Indian security forces, including the elite National Security Guard, NSG, managed to neutralize the attackers. 9 of the terrorists were killed in firefights, while one, Ajmal Kasab, was captured alive. Kasab's arrest was a huge breakthrough, and he gave up critical information about the planning and execution of the attacks before he was executed in 2012. Lockerbie bombing, Scotland. The year was December 21st, 1988. You know, just a few days before Christmas, so everybody in town was up and about. People are hopping on flights, planning to spend the holidays with family and friends, and Pan Am Flight 103 was no different, taking off from London's Heathrow Airport and bound for New York City. However, at exactly 7:03 p.m., just 38 minutes after takeoff, as the Boeing 747 soared over Lockerbie, a peaceful town in Scotland, disaster struck. A bomb hidden inside a suitcase in the cargo hold exploded, ripping through the plane like it was made of cardboard. The blast was so powerful it blew the nose of the plane clean off, sending it and all 259 people aboard plummeting to the ground. But the horror didn't stop there. Debris from the plane rained down on the small town of Lockerbie, killing 11 people on the ground as well. This was no accident though, because the bomb had been carefully hidden inside a radio cassette player and smuggled aboard as luggage. The device had been loaded with Semtex, a highly explosive material, and the plan was to blow up the plane while it was over the Atlantic, making it harder to trace who was responsible. But thanks to a scheduling delay, the plane was still over land when the bomb went off. Well, after a lengthy investigation that lasted years and involved just about every intelligence agency you could think of, fingers pointed to Libya. Specifically, Libyan agents working for Muammar Gaddafi. Apparently, Libya had a big bone to pick with the US and the West at that time, because in 1986, the US bombed Libya in response to terrorist attacks, and Gaddafi wasn't the type to let a grudge slide. Lockerbie was essentially his idea of payback, though it took more than a decade before justice caught up with those responsible. But eventually, in 1991, 2 Libyan nationals named Abdelbaset al-Megrahi and Lamine Khalifa Fima were charged with the bombing. The devastating attack killed all 259 people aboard the plane, in addition to the 11 people on the ground. So if you've ever wondered why airport security is so strict about electronics and liquids, well, this attack played a major part in that shift. Beslan school siege, Russia. Picture this. It's September 1st, 2004, the first day of school in the small town of Beslan, North Ossetia. Kids are all giddy with excitement, new backpacks and fresh pencils, and are probably wondering who'll trade lunches at recess, while the adults were probably just trying to hide their tears of joy over having the house to themselves again for a few hours. But then, a group of Chechen militants decided that it would be better to start the new term by showing up at the school with a whole buffet of chaos, terror, and explosives. These militants stormed school number 1 and took over 1,100 people, students, teachers, parents, and staff, hostage. This attack wasn't just a random act of evil, but a part of the ongoing conflict between Chechen separatists and Russia. Chechnya had been fighting for independence from Russia for years, and things were already hotter than the inside of a microwave burrito. The militants were angry at Russia's involvement in Chechnya and figured the best way to get attention was by taking a bunch of innocent kids hostage. Well, they packed the school gym with terrified children, strapped explosives all over the place, and demanded Russian troops withdraw from Chechnya. You know, your typical list of impossible demands, like asking for world peace. What was supposed to be a bright and sunny school year quickly became a 3-day horror show show, and due to overcrowding and no ventilation, the whole place was hotter than a sauna in Siberia. Hostages were deprived of food and water, not even a juice box or a stale cracker. During these horrific 3 days, every sort of negotiation crumbled faster than a cookie and milk. And then, on September 3rd, the worst happened. Russian security forces stormed the school and turned the place into a literal war zone. The roof of the gym collapsed, and it was a mess of fire, bullets, and chaos. When the dust finally settled, 333 people were killed, including 186 children. Hundreds more were injured, and many were left with physical and emotional scars that would last a lifetime. Westgate Mall attack, Kenya. So, just imagine it's a typical Saturday in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. You've just finished a week of work and you're getting ready to hit the mall, maybe grab a coffee, check out some new clothes, or catch a movie. So you head to the Westgate Mall, a bustling hotspot where people go to relax and shop, and everything seems perfectly normal until it isn't. Suddenly, what was a regular day turns into a nightmare as you hear gunfire erupt. People are screaming and you see armed men storming the mall, but these aren't just robbers. This isn't some cheesy heist movie where the bad guys want diamonds. These guys are here to create chaos, to terrorize, and to kill, and they're not leaving anytime soon. Well, this was exactly the reality for citizens in Kenya on September 21st, 2013 in the Westgate Mall attack. You see, Al-Shabaab, the militant group behind the attack, was out to make a statement. Based in neighboring Somalia, Al-Shabaab wasn't exactly known for their love of retail therapy. They were ticked off about Kenya's military presence in Somalia, where Kenyan troops were helping to fight their terrorist stronghold. So in their warped minds, they decided to hit Kenya where it hurt, the heart of its capital. And unfortunately, that heart was Westgate Mall. The attackers, 4 gunmen in total, entered the mall like they were walking into a war zone, firing at anyone and everyone. They weren't picky about their targets because everybody was treated as targets in this horrifying madness. But here's where things got even worse. This wasn't a quick smash and grab attack. No, this was a 4-day-long siege. Imagine being trapped in a mall, knowing armed terrorists are somewhere nearby and not knowing if or when help will arrive. Terrifying, right? That's what hundreds of people experienced as they tried to stay alive while the gunmen roamed freely. It got even worse, if you could even say that, because as the attack progressed, the gunmen began taking hostages, turning an already horrible situation into an even more complicated one. Although the Kenyan security forces and police arrived quickly, this wasn't a simple rescue mission because the terrorists were entrenched, and they'd set up booby traps and bombs throughout the mall to keep the authorities at bay. It was like a game of deadly cat and mouse, except the stakes were far too real. When the siege finally ended on September 24th, a total of 67 people were killed, including foreign nationals from 13 countries. This wasn't just a Kenyan tragedy, it was a global one. Paris attacks. France. It all started like any other Friday night in Paris, but at 9:20 p.m. during a football match between France and Germany at the Stade de France, the first sign of chaos erupted. A suicide bomb detonated explosives near the stadium, sending shockwaves of panic through the crowd, but that was just the beginning. While fans were still cheering inside, unaware of what had just happened, a series of other attacks were already underway. Gunmen from the terrorist group ISIS were unleashing hell across Paris, targeting cafes, restaurants, and the Bataclan Theater, where the American band Eagles of Death Metal was performing to a packed house. If this sounds like the plot of a movie, it's because it's played out with the kind of terror that you'd think could only exist in fiction. Tragically, this was very real. These terrorists went on a killing spree through the streets of Paris and were just shooting at people like it was a live-action game. After they hit the stadium, the cafes and restaurants across the city, and the Bataclan Theater, the death toll was a staggering 130 people, with another 416 critically injured. Now, the cause for this nightmare was because the ISIS group wanted revenge against France for involving themselves in the war against Iraq and Syria. Apparently, France, along with other nations, had been bombing ISIS strongholds, and these terrorists wanted to bring the war back to French soil. But unfortunately, they didn't choose military targets, but went after innocent civilians who were just living their lives. Bali bombings, Indonesia. It's a Saturday night in Kuta, Bali, Bali's party district. The air is buzzing with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and the occasional off-key karaoke. Tourists are hitting up their favorite spots, Paddy's Pub and the Sari Club, and everyone is in full-on vacation mode, enjoying what seems like another perfect night in Bali. But at 11:05 p.m., paradise was rudely interrupted because a suicide bomber walked into Paddy's Pub with a backpack full of explosives, and within seconds, the entire place was in flames. As if that wasn't bad enough, just 15 seconds later, a second bomb hidden in a Mitsubishi van packed with C4 and ammonium nitrate exploded outside the Sari Club just down the street and obliterated the club, leaving a crater where the building once stood. This wasn't the good vibes only Bali tourists had signed up for. This was an orchestrated attack that would go down as one of the deadliest in Southeast Asia. Now you might be wondering, who on earth would ruin a Bali vacation? Well, say hello to Jemaah Islamiyah, a terrorist group with ties to Al-Qaeda. Their entire goal was to attack Western tourists, particularly Australian, as a response to what they saw as Western interference in the Muslim world. Bali, being a hotspot for international travelers and Australians in particular, was the unfortunate target. The aftermath was chaotic as emergency responders rushed to the scene. Hospitals were overflowing and people were frantically trying to find loved ones. By the time a census was done, the attack had killed a whopping 202 people, including 88 Australians, 38 Indonesians, and tourists from 20 other countries. Thankfully, the hunt for the perpetrators kicked off immediately, with Indonesian authorities, helped by international forces, especially from Australia, tracking down members of Jemaah Islamiyah. Within a matter of months, several key players were arrested, including the bomb maker Ali Imran and Imam Samudra, the mastermind behind the attack. Sri Lanka Easter bombings, Sri Lanka. Now, when we think of Easter, we think of egg hunts, chocolate bunnies, and maybe wearing that one pastel shirt we save for special occasions. But what unfolded on the morning of April 21st, 2019 in Sri Lanka was a series of coordinated bombings that left destruction, heartbreak, and horror in its wake. The day began like any other Easter Sunday, and the church was filled with worshippers who were attending Mass. However, by 8:45 a.m. during the services, the first bombs went off in 3 churches. St. Anthony's Shrine in Colombo, St. Sebastian's Church in Negombo, and Zion Church in Barakaloa were packed to the brim with worshippers. Imagine going to celebrate the resurrection of Christ only to meet your own fiery grave. And if that wasn't horrifying enough, nearly at the same time, explosions ripped through 3 luxury hotels in Colombo: the Shangri-La, the Cinnamon Grand, and the Kingsbury Hotel, where tourists were staying. This senseless act of evil and wickedness was carried out by a local extremist group called the National Tawhid Jamaat (NTJ), but they were inspired by the ideology of ISIS. According to their stupid, twisted logic, Sri Lanka has been in relative peace since the end of its brutal civil war in 2009, so they just wanted to spice things up and bring attention to their cause. NTJ's leader, Saran Hashim, was a radical YouTube preacher who plotted this massacre along with other militants to gain international attention. They claimed that they were retaliating for the Christchurch mosque shootings in New Zealand that happened a month earlier. It's like a horrific tete-a-tete, except instead of words, they used bombs. To make matters even worse, later that day, a 4th hotel, the Tropical Inn, was bombed, and there were additional explosions in Colombo, including one in a housing complex and another near a zoo. By the time the dust settled, 269 people had lost their lives, including 45 foreign nationals from more than a dozen countries.